We discussed the purpose of international law, what it looks like, and where it comes from. Now I want to discuss some specific instruments of international law that are relevant for conservation. Global and regional agreements that address environmental issues are often called multilateral environmental agreements, or MEAs. Most MEAs use the name convention. Some MEAs focus on a specific type of species or ecosystem, such as the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands of International Importance, especially as waterfowl habitat. Others have a wider scope, like the Convention on Biological Diversity, which provides a broad framework for conservation. Modern MEAs can have an extensive governance structure. At the core is the text of the convention, which contains legally binding obligations. Sometimes the convention text includes appendices or annexes that are more specific and easier to modify than the main text. For example, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species has 3 appendices, listing threatened or vulnerable species to which varying levels of obligation apply. Every 2 or 3 years, the parties review the list of species in the appendices and decide whether to add or remove species. A convention may have 1 or more protocols. These are additional agreements that are negotiated under the auspices of the main agreement, but may contain additional legally binding obligations. Parties to the convention are not obligated to join its protocols, and often protocols have a smaller number of members than the parent convention. For example, the Convention on Biological Diversity has 2 protocols, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety and the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing, both named after the cities in which they were adopted. The Cartagena Protocol even has a protocol of its own, the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress. MEAs normally set up a governance structure to facilitate implementation. The highest governing structure is the Conference of the Parties, or COP, which usually is held every few years. Protocols have their own high-level governance structure called the Meeting of the Parties, or MOP. The COP and MOP are typically held in the same place, back-to-back or at the same time. At the COP or MOP or COP-MOP, parties come together to make decisions about the interpretation and implementation of the convention. They can adopt resolutions, decisions, plans, or strategies, or modify the annexes or appendices, or set up working groups or task forces to investigate specific issues. They can review and make decisions about financial contributions and budget. They can also direct the Secretariat to take on particular programs or tasks. Which brings us to the Secretariat. Almost all conventions have a Secretariat, responsible for managing and guiding the day-to-day implementation work of the convention and its protocols. The Secretariat cannot make legally binding decisions, but it can provide guidance and support to the parties in implementing the convention.